All right, we're back here on the game. John Kurtz, Mason Vogt, Mitch Fortner, all with you. Talking a lot of attendance today. K-State 25% attendance. Gene Taylor helping get that done. Coalition with the Riley County Health Department. But one story from over the weekend that should catch your eye if you're a K-State fan. The Wildcats Big 12 opener now is at Oklahoma. The Oklahoma Sooners are now going to be without Kennedy Brooks, who is their best running back. A guy who rushed for over 800 yards last year. He is opting out. And to get some insight on that, we welcome in R.J. Young. Does a great YouTube show based out of Tulsa. Has covered Oklahoma for a long time. Really appreciate the time in joining us, R.J. And how much of a shock to the system was this for Oklahoma fans in the program finding out about Kennedy Brooks?
About 30,000 volts, John. Like, this came out of nowhere. Nobody saw it coming. Even the day before, Riley had said, hey, I haven't had kids opt out, but it's hard to tell who might do what. And then the very next day, Sunday afternoon, The Athletic breaks the news. The star tailback for Oklahoma, Kennedy Brooks, chose to opt out. And that really, really hurts their depth in some ways that I don't think even Oklahoma fans are comfortable acknowledging.
Well, there's some irony here, right? Because Trey Sermon left to go to Ohio State in search of playing time. Now he literally cannot play, and the job is wide open at Oklahoma.
Right, and more than that, there's a really great chance that the third best running back on the 2019 roster, Ramondre Stevenson, won't be available to play between 4 and 6 games because he, like Trajan Bridges, a wide receiver, Ronnie Perkins, a defensive end, and all freshman American Big 12 player, and ESPN All-American at that freshman position. They're all out, right? So now we're talking about 3 guys that they knew that they weren't going to have, and your depth looks like a TJ Pledger, who hasn't done much since signing with Oklahoma in 2018, a Marcus Major, a really great kid out of Millwood that drew comparisons to Adrian Peterson. We'll see how that goes. And a true freshman in Seth McGowan. That is it. So right now, you are really looking for an emergency tailback even before we get through a second week of camp for Oklahoma, as they just got back to work on Saturday.
Talking with R.J. Young, who covers the Oklahoma Sooners, about the news that Kennedy Brooks has opted out. All right, Lincoln Riley's an offensive mastermind. I'm certainly not going to question his ability to figure this thing out. I think the Oklahoma offense will still be pretty good, but I don't know. If you were going to rank it on a scale of 1 to 10, like how significant will this harm the Oklahoma offense?
6.5, right? Because, like, the way I see it, it's a variety of things, right? It's Kennedy Brooks, okay. It's Trey Sermon, okay. It's Ramondre Stevenson, okay. Now add to that Jaden Hazelwood, who was the number 1 wide receiver in the country in 2019, is out with an injury. Add to that a grad transfer in UCLA, former UCLA wide receiver Theo Howard is out with an Achilles injury. Now you don't know who your starting left tackle is, even as you have 5 guys that started games for Oklahoma on that offensive line. But one of those guys was getting beat like he stole something by, a Kansas State defensive end that might be able to, beat up on him once again on September 26th. So, it's 6.5 for me, right? And you got a new starter, and I get Spencer Rattler is the goods, but we haven't seen the goods. And I think right now, Oklahoma is one major injury away from being the most vulnerable that it's been in the Lincoln Riley era.
All right, well, you probably knew this was coming because you were talking to those of us in Manhattan, Kansas here. All right, that's the Big 12 opener, September 26th. There will be one tune-up, but we're talking about new quarterback, down 3 running backs. You just mentioned the left tackle. K-State should be confident playing Oklahoma considering what happened last year. Is that all of a sudden now a sneaky, tough game for the Sooners?
No, because they lost to Kansas State last year. I would be with you if they did not remember the sting of getting 48 points dropped on their skull by a Kansas State team that I didn't believe deserved to be scoring 48 points on anybody, let alone Oklahoma, right? And that was in a game in which Jalen Hurts, who was second in the Heisman balloting, played a hell of a game, right? And a couple of things go Oklahoma's way. Maybe we're talking about it differently, but we're not. So if anything, they should have 48-41 tattooed on their foreheads right now because that's what it was. I mean, that was the game in which they didn't look ready to play, and they were left to argue with a referee about an onside kick. That's not the way that an Oklahoma team is used to going out. So normally I would be with you, right? But because they remember that sting, they might have a little more pep in their step, especially for a Big 12 season opener against the only team in the Big 12 to hand them an L.
RJ Young talking with us, covers the Oklahoma Sooners. Check out the RJ Young Show on YouTube. I am a big Lincoln Riley fan. I love Chris Kleiman. I love Lincoln Riley just as much. He seems to me to be the perfect kind of coach in 2020 with everything that's now under the job description of being a head coach, which is much different than it was, 6 months ago, let alone 4 or 5 years ago. Are you with me on that? Is Lincoln Riley the perfect college football coach for this day and age?
I think yes and no. It's perfect in that he will roll with these things. He is adaptable. He listens to the players. He wants to put in a scheme that takes advantage of his players' best attributes and not necessarily the system that he most likes to run. That said, the one knock that you might give him is his experience as an adult, right? And I'm not talking about as a coach. I mean, that dude's been coaching since he was 19 years old. So he's got as much as anybody that came out of college and might be 40, 45. But in that way, there are little things that still were getting to him and getting Alex Grinch, quite honestly, who is not yet 40. And a couple of those things were things that Chris Kleiman and his crew could do. I mean, Courtney Messingham ran a friggin' fake pull power. Who does that? Right? Like, I watched the film on this, and I'm going, wait a second. I sent this to an offensive line friend of mine who's an NFL vet, 10 years. His name is Jerry Ostrowski, and he was freaking out, man, because he's like, I've never seen that before. And it worked because the kids were taught to read their keys. They read their keys, and they were still wrong. And if you can put that kind of scheme in against a team like Oklahoma that is built to beat you on talent alone, you know what you're doing, and then some. And Chris Kleiman, I don't mind saying it's got more national championship rings than anybody else in this conference. So in that way, I think that they're both uniquely equipped for this time, right? They're uniquely equipped to deal with what we're witnessing and seeing, but also they have the advantage of, hey, they get to make the playbook up as they go along in this, and somebody's going to be right, somebody's going to be wrong. But if it comes down to Jimmy's and Joe's, most people would pick Oklahoma. If it comes down to technical awareness, I could see it really easily going toward Chris Kleiman. But I need to ask you this. How do you guys feel about losing Scotty Hazelton? How is that going to impact the defense for Kansas State?
Yeah, I can tell you that it was a bummer, right? I mean, Scotty Hazelton did a great job, had them statistically in a lot of categories as a top 4 defense in the Big 12, which is pretty remarkable considering the talent disadvantage. The feeling here is that Joe Klanderman, who was promoted from within, is a rising star.
Okay.
Kleiman really likes him. So I think right now there is a lot of cautious optimism about where things are at, but you are dealing with the caveat, at least as it relates to 2020, with no spring practice, right? So that hurts. But I think most people feel like K-State's going to be fine, and they just simply couldn't pay what Michigan State was going to pay for Hazelton.
No, it makes all the sense. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hijack your segment. I just needed to ask that question.
No, man, you're good. I will talk as much K-State as you would like, my friend. Before I let you out of this, let me ask you this question about Mike Gundy. Where are Oklahoma State fans at with him? A loaded question after everything that's happened the last few months.
Man, they don't care. Like, it's did he win football games or did he not? Because you're also talking about the most success that Oklahoma State has ever had in one sustained era in all of its history, right? They remember 2011. They remember Whedon to Blackman. They remember being an Iowa State loss away from playing for a national championship. And through all of this summer, when we saw Burns Hargis, we saw Mike Holder have every opportunity to fire him if they wanted, and they extracted some things like $1 million in his salary, and they were able to get rid of this ridiculous rollover clause that basically puts him at a 4-year contract in which he'll be done by the time his kid graduates from Oklahoma State. But I have heard nothing from Oklahoma State fans, run-of-the-mill, I should say, that want to see him go. I've only heard from 1 or 2 donors that wanted to see him fired. But since then, Mike Gundy's just being Mike Gundy. He don't care. I mean, he even talked to media earlier today saying that he didn't really want to address any of the things that had gone on this summer, and he only wanted to talk football. So if that's what they're going to let him do, then that speaks volumes about what they believe about Mike Gundy and what they really respect, which is winning football games.
Ugh. What a mess. I mean, it's not surprising. It's not surprising, but kind of gross, little icky. RJ, appreciate the time, man. Love cutting it up with you. RJ Young Show on YouTube. Great college football content up there. We'll talk to you soon, man.
I appreciate you, John.
All right, there's RJ Young joining us here to talk a little Oklahoma and Oklahoma State football.